What up, guys? Welcome to another edition of the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. We're
Masterpiece Theater.
Masterpiece Theater. We are. I got books in the back. We could do that one day. I could just sit there and like open up books and like talk about stuff.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
Let's do it.
It'll be like the reading Rainbow meets a beard.
Bearded
jiu-jitsu.
Rainbow. That sounds weird.
Bearded Rainbow. That doesn't sound nearly as entertaining.
Nope.
Today's podcast is going to be one of our rules for jiu-jitsu episodes. It's going to be a rule that I think is just useful to keep in mind when you are digging into an instructional, going to a seminar, you're in class, you're doing any of this stuff. It's something that can be useful to you. And I think it's a useful idea to remember at any stage of the game, whether you're a white belt or a black belt, because even as they're higher belts, we can get away from this, so we can kind of forget about it. So I think it's a useful idea either way. So we'll jump into that in a second, and I hope that this serves you on your jiu-jitsu path, and hope it helps you. Big thanks to our sponsors for helping make this podcast happen. Charlotte's Web. charlottesweb.com is the website. Jiu-Jitsu20 is the code to get 20% off the order. Again, Charlotte's Web is a CBD company that is third-party tested. They make a great product. They have options for everything from gummies to tinctures to balms to THC, not necessarily free, but a very low amount of THC. So if you're tested, you'll be in a good position there. You can check out their stuff at charlesweb.com. Look at it as whatever you're interested in. And my encouragement to you is, if you find something you'd like to try it out for a month and see what you think. That's always my encouragement with someone with supplements, because again, I use it and I like it. I take it at nighttime as part of my sort of winding down routine before bed, but it's different for everybody. Eugene takes it in the early part of the day. And again, play around with it and see what you think. Play around with dosages, play around with timing, and again, see what you think from it and give it a try. Also, thanks to Roll BJJ. EpicRollBJJ.com is the website. Epic Roll is a company that makes gear and apparel for jiu-jitsu people, and it's made by a fellow black belt that's in the community that's actually a part of it, right? So there's some jiu-jitsu brand companies there's a lot of them obviously that are made by jiu-jitsu people, but there's some that are out there that are not made by jiu-jitsu companies. It's just like random, I guess, people that are on the internet trying to make a buck off of us, and they're stationed overseas somewhere, and they're just putting out stuff to get us to buy it. Matt is a guy, he makes the designs himself. He, gets them out there to you guys that buy the stuff from him. And again, he's a super cool dude. I've trained with him before. I like him. And again, he makes good products. And so if you want some cool designs, great quality stuff, check out his website at epicrollbjj.com. If you find something on his website that you like, maybe it's really his awesome, incredibly comfortable no-gi shorts, maybe it's a t-shirt, whatever it might be, use the promo code Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off at checkout. Also, thanks to Manscaped. Manscaped.com is the website. The promo code, if you do buy something, is Jiu-Jitsu20. That's 20% off the order and free shipping at checkout. It's a good deal. And again, I've talked about Manscaped numerous times on the podcast. They make fantastic products. I just got their new cologne they had. I think it's, Persevere or something like that?
Yeah, I like it.
It smells good. I liked their cologne before. I used their beard trimmer the other day to trim my beard up, which is amazing because it's got an adjustable dial. So you have one fixed guard on it, and then simply the blade moves up and down depending on what kind of length you want. You trim a little bit, like if you do, like my beard, I trim a little bit shorter on the sides, a little bit longer on the bottom. I used their body wash this morning and their deodorant this morning. I mean, so again, I like their stuff and I use it all the time. I think I'm actually wearing their underwear.
Yeah, I might be as well.
Huh?
I might be as well. It's comfy.
Let's see.
Oh, there it is. Chewy. Hey, if you want to see Chewy's underwear, hop onto the YouTubes and check it out. YouTube.com/Jiu-Jitsu podcast.
Gentlemen, don't get too excited. I just showed the top band of it. So
we're gonna get canceled, bro.
No, we're not. If that's what's going to get us, then the whole internet would be canceled, because that's more genteel than just about anything out there. I mean, I've got my I've got my shirt on for look at that. We're both wearing Manscaped underwear. I got my shirt on for heaven's sake. Oh boy. So again, check them out if you want to. They make fantastic products. They've got my bearded approval. Manscaped.com, Jiu-Jitsu20 at checkout. And if you want to support the podcast directly, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to an ad-free version of the podcast. So if you absolutely despise these ads, which you probably don't because you're listening to it right now, because that's the way it works, right? If you hate them, you're probably flipping through it.
You have to listen. You have to listen to the ads to get to the ad-free version to know to discover that there's an ad-free version.
Right. So if you're somehow just flipping through this right now and you would like to get an ad-free version of this, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Upon joining, you'll get access to that, but you'll also get access to an exclusive library of content we've been building up for several years, with everything from seminars and recordings from our guests that we've had on the podcast, to warm up and routines that Eugene's put together specifically for jiu-jitsu people to deal with their jiu-jitsu problems and tight areas and muscles. And so again, all that's included with it. Check it out at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And last but not least, guys, if you want to get my daily email, you can do so by going to my website at jiu-jitsu.net/join. Upon joining, you'll get access to some exclusive ebooks. And then afterwards, you will get my email. The emails go into a myriad of different things. Sometimes it's on the books that I like, and I like to share them. Sometimes it could be on a very technical idea about jiu-jitsu. Sometimes it's just about random things that are happening. But either way, I try to make them entertaining and useful. And again, you can unsubscribe at any time. And again, it's at my website at jiu-jitsu.net/join. So with that said, guys, let's get into this podcast. Here's the rule today. The rule is very simple. One technique, idea, or concept could radically change your game. So always be looking for that one thing. Now, I bring this up, and the reason being is because what happens a lot of times, this happens very early, right? In the early stages, we get into jiu-jitsu and we are absolutely overwhelmed. We have so much stuff going on. We're not really sure where to start. We're just like, okay, there's so much stuff. What stuff should I be trying to hang on to, right? Over time, we start to, get better and things like that. We start to figure out things that work for us, and our game gets a little bit more dialed in. But then at the same token, that same issue happens later on because there's a new problem, right? The new problem is that imagine that, again, you're a white belt and you're drowning, right? You're just in the ocean, you're drowning, you're flopping around. You finally get and you climb up onto a boat, right? As like a blue or purple belt, and you can kind of steer around the ocean now. Well, now the problem becomes you got a big mass of stuff in front of you. Where do you want to go with it? And this happens a lot of times as we get better, where we're no longer just surviving. Now we have options. We can play around with different positions. And again, like Eugene, you're a black belt. If you want to come in tomorrow, you could literally watch a technique on YouTube or on Instagram, kind of give it a little bit of a run over, and you could immediately go try it today. You have that skill if you wanted to, right? And so it becomes difficult in the sense like that, where we now have to come back to the fact that we only need one. Also, too, people will watch an instructional, and I've heard people say this before. People have sent me messages, and they're like, Chewy, how many videos or how long is this instructional? You know what I mean? As if somehow it being 7 or 8 hours is somehow going to be better than if it was like 2 hours. It's like, well, that it doesn't matter how long it is. What matters is what you get from this thing. Or if you go to a seminar, people will try to remember every single move from the seminar. They'll try to write everything down on a notebook, and then they end up remembering nothing. And the idea that I want to share is that you only have to hang on to one. One thing can radically change your game. A great story that illustrates this. I've got two that I'll share with you. One was when I was a purple belt. One of my old coaches, Renato Tavares, I went to a seminar. So it was, he was coming into town for a seminar on Saturday. Now this session that I went to was on a Friday, and it was tough. I remember I was getting out of work. I was rushing to get there. There was a really bad traffic jam, wreck or something like that. I'm fighting to get there, and I finally get there barely on time for the session. I walk in, and Hanato's teaching half guard techniques, very simple half guard techniques. But that position that he showed, like, it got me going down this rabbit hole. And I remember using the techniques and instantly was like, oh, dude, these feel good. Feels really good. That weekend, I showed them to everybody. I was teaching everybody. Like, I was having people like, hey, let's go do like the open mat. Let's do some drilling. Or I was going to people's houses who had mats. Hey, let me show you this technique I've been working on. And then I remember the next week I was rolling with my coaches who usually had my number, and I was able to sweep them. And I was like, oh, here we go. I've got some success with it. And then I went down this deep rabbit hole, and it's become one of my best positions. And I've modified it to my liking. But it was like one or two techniques. That one position just ran with it. Also, back in the day, I was going down and training with my coach, Sean. And I remember one of the biggest things, because I would drive down to Nashville, usually leave at 6 a.m. in the morning or something like that, get down there and train around 10, do his competition class, take a break in between, do his regular class, and I would leave and come back home. And one of the things that I got from Sean was his focus on drilling, right? Basically doing a technique and just reps, 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 reps. And I started putting that into the mix, and it paid off big time. And also, too, one of the basic passes he was the first one to show me the X pass, like basically a standing X pass.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like back in 2012, 2011. Dude, that was my jam. I was using that all the time. And so, again, one idea that you take from someone, you can just take it and run with it. And so my encouragement is to you guys, this idea to bring back around to you, it's not very a long one, is always be looking for that, right? Again, you don't want to, one can be a dangerous number in the sense that you never want to be pigeonholed by you only have one position or you only have one technique that you can do, right? You always want to have multiples. But when it comes to when you're trying to like add stuff that's new into the game, when you're trying to add these things from instructionals and everything else, only worry about one thing at a time, because that allows you to really dive into it, have some focus. And while it doesn't seem like a big deal, one small adjustment can make a huge difference in your game. And as I said before, a lot of times when I think about the biggest shifts in my game, most of them have come because of a simple adjustment, a simple technique, a simple position that I learned, and then that one thing led to a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, you shared this idea of like you're on a boat or something, and then you have like 1 degree, like you find one little thing and it changes your trajectory, and all of a sudden
Mhm.
you end up somewhere completely different, right?
Yep.
Like over years and over time, if you stick to that concept, that idea, or maybe that little technique or that um move that you discover. For me, it was like in the gi was the cross collar grip, right? I mean, cross collar grip is very, very common. People use it all the time. People use it for different reasons. Sometimes it's defensive. I mean, a lot of times offensive. But I realized that like I can use it, and I'm basically one movement away from a choke, and that movement became like a whole, like that one technique became this whole plethora of like sweeps and leading to other submissions
Yeah.
and leading to other positions, because people will get so fixated. They know I go after the collar, so they get so fixated in protecting and fighting that. It would set up different opportunities for me. And like, and I don't know, like for you, as far as that one concept, one idea, for me, it was just kind of like organic. It kind of came. It kind of like, it just felt right.
Right.
Like, is there something for you? Like, are you seeking it out? Or if somebody's new to jujitsu and they're trying to find that one thing, like, I mean, do you just kind of have to sit back and just be open? Like, what's the best way, do you think, to discover that one thing or that one idea that's going to change your trajectory?
So again, I've talked about this before. It depends on the person. Um, if you're like a left brain thinker, right brain thinker, if you're like a very analytical person or a very sort of intuitive person, the artist versus the engineer.
Mm,
Engineers typically don't like my answers because, again, if you're like, I need to have this very structured thing, I can't give you that because that's not how I personally learn. Um, I like a little bit of freedom. So early on, what's always worked best for me is just playing around, just play, like just experiment, see what happens. And then what happens is over time, you'll start to kind of find things that work for you. They'll feel
yeah.
right, right? It feels right, feels good. And then you can be a little bit more deliberate with it. And then I sort of focus on where is this position and how can I build off of this thing, right? Instead of having to add something brand new, how can I build off of this? And I think that's kind of the next stage there. So like once you have a game established, you can try to look at adding things onto it. So for instance, here's an idea. Let's say that, you know, your first order of business with the house, we're going to build a foundation, right? All right, we got to build that foundation. Okay, we got the foundation set. Great. Well, we're going to put a roof now. We can't put up roof. We don't have walls yet,
Right.
right? So like you got to think about the process there. So like in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times, okay, you might see some really wacky, cool, crazy move, but you got to think, do I even get into that position? Can I actually get there to make that happen? Because if not, then what's the point? Like for instance, maybe you see a really wild butterfly sweep, but then you never play butterfly guard. Well, before you worry about that sweep, we should start playing butterfly guard some, if that's where you want to go. Or try to find a technique that works from a guard that you're already proficient with. Not to say it. So like, so for instance, with the half guard stuff that I learned from Hanato, it was already pretty similar to a half guard that I played, just some small adjustments, and so it was like I was more easily able to absorb it than if I never played any half guard and then having to learn it all from scratch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you talked about the idea of play, and I think one of the most undervalued skills for like beginners and white belts is the ability to flow roll. I think that's a skill that like we don't talk about really as a skill at all, but that is, if somebody knows how to flow roll, it is valuable, because then you end up in positions that you've never been in, or in just even the setups could be different, or how you get there would be different or unique in a way, because you're allowing yourself to play. You're not going through these specific movement pathways. You're actually like allowing yourself to be moved, and your partner's allowing themselves to be moved in certain positions in certain ways that's not typical. And I think flow rolling, you can give me your thoughts on this, but I think like having people flow roll, even white belts, which it's very hard for them to do so. And it's kind of a frustrating thing as an upper belt to flow roll with the white belt, even sometimes blue belts, but mostly because there's no I think as a white belt, you're trying to survive. Like your idea is just to survive, and you have to go as hard as you can. So the idea of just letting go and allowing yourself to be moved and others to be moved by you, I think it's very valuable. I mean, and I think it's just a great way to get your brain moving and kind of jog your kind of almost like your jiu-jitsu brain in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, being able to just practice techniques with really what you're doing is you're practicing a technique, giving and taking, like letting them have something and taking something, and practicing in a much more relaxed fashion. It's a great way to warm up.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be useful, especially if you're injured or something like that and you need to stay active. I think the issue with some people, because there's some white belts that have no problems flow rolling, some people just they're too darn tense and rigid. And I think it comes from like either them, like you said, always being focused on surviving, or them wanting to be the winner, right? And sometimes that can be the problem, because if you feel like you're coming in, because this happens with a lot of people. Like, think about it this way: like, when we get into something, we don't get into something because we want to suck. We want to get into something because we want to be good. I was talking about this in one of my emails the other day. So back in the day, when I would play video games a lot, right? When I was a kid, one of my favorite genres of video games was role-playing games, right? And so when you play the role-playing game, you play the role-playing game with the intention of you building up this character so that they become the paragon of goodness or whatever of justice, and they go fight the evil that's around, and you're gonna go fight big dragons and evil mages or something, right? But in the beginning, a lot of these old games, I don't think they do this as much anymore. You'd always end up fighting like rats and stuff. Like, you'd be fighting rats and bugs and stuff and slimes, and you would essentially be the you'd be the Orkin man. So you'd be playing local pest control. And so, but you build up yourself, right? And then eventually you become the thing that you wanted to be, which was this really cool warrior. They're out doing stuff. A lot of people don't come into jiu-jitsu to be the person that gets smashed. And so they're so desperate to be good at it. And so sometimes that can get in the way, because you can be so serious about like wanting to be good at it that you can't even have fun with it. You see that a lot. And I think that's an issue. You see that sometimes when that's projected onto children, people bring their kids in it, and the kids don't get a chance to play with it. It's always so serious for them because the parent makes it that way. And that's going to be bad, because think about it this way. Think about the stuff that we did. Anybody listening, think about the stuff that you did as a kid and how fun it was. And then maybe it became something serious later on, but in the beginning it was fun. You will remember it as being fun, right? But think about the things where as soon as you got into it, it was something super serious. You don't want to get into it, right? It's like reading. If your only experience with reading is reading like books in school, you're probably not going to want to read. But if you go out and you find books that you really enjoy, and you enjoy reading, you find a love for it, right? Like, I hated reading in school, but I love reading. I hated learning stuff in school because I hated the way it was taught most of the time. But I love learning, right? I love learning stuff. I love learning about certain subjects. And again, it's not that anything is bad about it, but it's just so damn serious. It can't be fun. And so you got to make sure that your jiu-jitsu stays fun. And again, that playful nature a lot of times allows you to experiment more. If you're in a more receptive state when you're looking for what that one thing is going to be, if you're more relaxed, your brain is a more receptive state, then you'll be better off to find it. You can just think about this. Think about like when you're looking for your keys, like all the guys out there, right? We're pretty bad about this. I heard us, like, I think it was a sociologist talking about this that said like we're really bad about losing our stuff because we're biologically wired to go like on hunts, and we're focusing on like going outward, like, right. And then the females would be taking care of like nurturing the kids, taking care of the tribe or whatever. And so we're out focusing on the hunt. So we're always focusing on going, that we forget about all our stuff everywhere. Do you forget your keys all the time?
My problem is I can't find like the refrigerator. Finding something in the refrigerator is such a challenge. Like I'll be like, it'll be right in front of my face. I'm like, where's the mayo? Where's the mayo? And my wife will come in and she's like staring. She's like, I'm looking right at it. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I don't see this at all. And she's like, it's right there. And I'm like, she's pointing almost right to it. And I still don't see it. And then I'm like, damn it. All the time. And that's like the running joke. Usually it's like women are really good at finding stuff, but like I like the fridge, for example, like I can't ever find anything. It'll be right in front of my face. I don't know what it is.
So with that idea, a lot of times for me, at least, if I'm trying to find something I've lost, a lot of times I find it when I stop thinking about it.
Sure.
It's like, like you'll have that thing where something's on the tip of your tongue and you're trying to remember it. And then you like, screw it, I can't remember it. And then like later on that day, you remember it.
Right.
It's kind of the same idea. So when you really try to force yourself to remember certain things, or force yourself to like, I got to be good at this, it takes a lot of the fun out of it, man. And it puts your brain into a far less receptive state,
right.
To take in new information. And so when you're just being able to be a little bit more playful and play, it's good. Don't get me wrong. There is a time to be serious. If you're getting ready for a competition, if you're trying to, push yourself, be serious. It's fine. But again, when we're in the taking in new information, that is very much going to require you to be receptive. And again, learning. And if you think about how humans learn at a base level, not the way that we were taught to learn in schools, but the way that we actually learn, like right out of the box, out of the womb, we just play with stuff, right? We listen to people say things, we play around with noises, right? Like we just figure things out. That's how humans learn. We figure things out by just tinkering and testing things out. That's the base level that we learn at. And so that's what you do. You basically start playing around with stuff and you find your one thing to work on. And then after you find this might be something, that's when you can get a little bit more serious about it. Like, let's drive this thing home and give this some practice. Let's do a lot of reps with this thing. And let's test this out in a competition or during hard rolls or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I was just kind of thinking of some concepts, like maybe some really good concepts, like general concepts for maybe white belts or blue belts or whomever. And one was like, it's just, I think of when we're going through, I think of like constant cues and things we'll tell, like maybe I'll tell my white belts during class, like that I see them commonly doing. You can see if you can think of a few concepts that you like. One concept is like controlling your breathing. I think that is like a concept and idea as a white belt. You want to survive in any position, you got to get comfortable being a little uncomfortable. And a lot of that comes to your breath. If you can control your breath, you have that ability to still stay relaxed. So I thought that was one, like for my white belts, that I will constantly tell them. And I hear you tell people all the time during classes, like control your breathing. Don't get out of like control, be nice and slow, or even controlling your breathing when you get a position, when you solidify a position, a couple of those couple little breaths, those quick breaths to, get in there. And then it's almost like you're reset. Now you're ready to go. Like, what do you got? You got any come to mind?
I could go on for hours, but here's one that just came to me while you were talking. Here's a really good one. Focus on the feeling when you're doing something. This is like high level stuff. It sounds so stupid, but like when you think about like really high level jiu-jitsu guys, like, again, just anybody that's really good at jiu-jitsu, think about what they're feeling. We're going off of feeling. Right.
Yes.
Like, I mean, again, there is some tactical, thoughtful stuff going on. We're reading our opponent and whatever else, but a lot of it is feeling. You know what I mean? How do I know I have a submission sunk in? It feels right. How do I know I'm applying a lot of pressure to this person? Because I can feel it. A lot of times early on, when people are learning a technique, they'll give it a little bit of something and they'll say, okay, cool, I got it. Right. But think about it this way. there is a high level version of that technique versus the one that you're learning early on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same technique, it just depends on how you apply it. And one of the things that really helped me out with getting better with my techniques was really zooming in with the sensation that I have in my body and where do I feel things. So for instance, if I'm in side control, how do I apply more pressure? Well, I need to tune into where do I feel my pressure being pushed into, because a lot of times you can be very heavy on your knees, right? And so you
Yep.
feel that weight pressing into your knees. That tells you your weight's on your knees, not the person. Opposed to, if I simply adjust my body just a bit, I can feel my chest digging into the person's body and ooh, there it is. Or even like with a sweep, I might see and feel how the person feels and how I get them loaded up onto my body, and I can feel them off balance, and I can feel their body getting ready to flop over. Or even when I'm choking someone, I can feel their body getting ready to let go.
Mm-hmm.
That's telling me, oh man, there's the choke's there. Like, you know this. If you put someone in a good choke, their body has a reaction, right? Like if you go for a choke and it's not there, you know it's not there. But if you get the choke, like let's say you have a great loop choke, you put someone into a loop choke, you instantly know because you can feel the choke sunk in, but you also have a reaction to them from their body that
Mm-hmm.
tells you, okay, it's legit, it's here. And again, all of that's feeling. And so and the reason why this is so important is because essentially what you're doing whenever you're learning a technique is you're trying to give yourself a mental representation of what that move feels like, right? Essentially, think about it this way. If you do a bench press, okay, once you really get the form down, how do you know you're doing the bench press right? Because you feel like it's the same one that you did before. So after you do a technique and you get to the point where you can execute it better in the gym, you can start to train yourself because you can feel, okay, it felt off. Why did it feel off? What was off about it? And you can sharpen your technique with or without a coach. Because in the beginning, we have to have the coach to give us direct feedback.
Sure.
But later on, once we have a really good mental representation of that technique and we know what it feels like to do it, we can then sort of say, well, what did I feel that time? That felt different. That felt different than the one that I know the feeling of to do it correctly, right? And that can be a good or a bad thing. But again, if it's not working for you, then you can dial in and see what's wrong with it. And again, you get that feeling from not just rushing through your reps and your practice, but really like being very focused on your technique. So if you're drilling a technique in class, you're practicing techniques in class, you don't want to just be like, I'm just going through the motions and we're gonna bullshit. Hey man, how was last weekend? Whatever. It's okay to do that a little bit, but you should also be really focused on, okay, how does everything feel when I'm doing this movement? And that requires a lot of mental focus. It's not as easy,
Yeah.
but it's super useful.
It's almost like mindful, like, you talk about mindful eating and mindful walking, like paying attention to what's under your feet when you're walking and like what the grass,
Yeah.
looks like and what it smells. So it's almost like mindful drilling. It's
Mm,
like you're actually paying close attention to where your hand placement is and how it feels, how the grip feels. You're kind of more, it's really like you said, focused. It's focused drilling.
yeah.
And you're trying to kind of like, in some ways, you're not never going to perfect the technique, but you're trying to do the technique as cleanly as possible
Mhm.
under the ideal circumstances with very low resisting opponents. So you make it really, really clean. And then when you speed it up, you try to keep it as clean and as smooth as possible. And then when you're actually rolling, the technique, somebody's not going to move ideally for you to implement that technique. So you're going to be able to, you're going to have so much information on that specific move that when somebody gives you an unideal scenario, you're still going to
Mhm.
be able to adjust your body, adjust your grip, position yourself, shift your weight to where you still are more successful. And I think that's when those techniques get really, really good. It's not that necessarily it's muscle memory so much, it's that
Mhm.
your body is able to adapt to the variables in a way that's intuitive. It's a feeling based, right? You don't have you can't think, oh, my hand's in the wrong spot, I have to move it. It's like you just do it based
Right.
on their reaction. And I think like that mindful drilling approach, if you can really, because it is fatiguing. You have to be in the right state of mind too, because man, like it's, if you're already tired going into training,
Yeah.
sometimes just getting in there and doing the thing is enough. But if you can come in and really be dialed in on your drilling and really like focus the reps and start with them nice and slow and then speed them up and keep them clean and smooth, then when you're actually rolling and the situation is not ideal, you're going to be able to really kind of modify and make the technique work for you.
That's right. Well, and the thing is like, it is fatiguing to do that, but when you start studying the way that like high level athletes and like many high level athletes how they train,
Mm-hmm.
that's a big one, right? They've done studies on like swimmers, for instance, where they like had the swimmers like, okay, let's see, like when you guys are doing your laps, you're doing this movement that you've done thousands and thousands of times previously, right? When they were speaking to musicians, okay, these musicians that have done the same song thousands of times. Okay, what are you guys thinking about when you're practicing? And they found that the best were thinking about the strokes, the movements, the subtle like sensations they had in their body. And the people that were good, but maybe not quite as good, they were just like, just going through the motions, thinking about lunch later, whatever, just that kind of stuff. And so it's hard to do. Simple idea, by the way. It's another one of those simple ideas that's very easy to practice. I mean, it's not easy to practice. It's very easy to implement because it doesn't really require a lot of anything else, but it's very difficult to do. Try to stay focused on something. I mean, like just that's it. That's the whole thing with meditation, right? Like being just tuning your brain into your breath over and over again, right? That's difficult. I mean, you do it for like 5 seconds and all your brain's already wandering. So then you go into the gym and you're like focusing on this movement and your brain's going to wander a little bit. But again, the more you can continually focus on those sensations, that's when like you'll hear people talk about invisible jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
It's nothing crazy, just basically being really tuned into your body and how it feels. And that's something else that comes with time too. But I think that you can speed the process up by really like when you're in a position, taking a pause and like, where do I feel everything? And that's something that's really helped me out because then you start to turn on these different areas and you start to look for certain feelings that you have on your body to let you know like what's going on. And it can help speed that process up of getting the feeling and the muscle memory down for those techniques.
Do you think that's something you can implement at white belt, or do you think it takes a little more experience?
No, I think you could. I think you would just take the techniques that you're working on, and as a white belt, like let's say that you're in side control. Okay, great example. Or here's a good one: mount. Most people have a really crappy mount early on because they put too much pressure on their knees. So when the next time you hold mount, see where your pressure is. Is it on that person, or is it on your knees? Is it on the mat? Those are important things. If you're doing a rear naked choke, a rear naked choke should not just be your arms squeezing. It should be your entire body, flexing and constricting around this person to extend and to choke this person out, right? Again, all that you can do this with any technique, even an arm bar. Make sure when you're arm bar, your legs are pressing down, your knees are pinching. You got to like do the little diagnostic check, make sure everything's happening.
It's like a body scan almost.
Yeah, do like if you've ever done like maybe like a yoga nidra session or something like that, where you're doing these body scans and tuning into different points of your body. It's the same idea. Basically, you have a couple of biggies for every technique, and then you just kind of check. Oh, we got all these points. Good, we're good to go. This is a good technique, and it's something that you can practice in your drilling and your practice in class. That's very useful. That a lot of people just don't do.
Yeah. I think also some other things that to get good at that is you have to be consistent. I think another concept that's you have to be consistent, whether it's just getting into class on a consistent basis, even if you're injured, just showing up and watching, just being in the environment, being consistent. And that may mean you do the same move or the same technique ad nauseum, and you're like, God, this is getting boring, but like you're getting so much better at that technique and you're building such efficiency. So I think for the common question is, well, how do I get to blue belt, or how do I get better at jiu-jitsu? It's like you just remain consistent. Obviously it's not the only thing, but that's what you got to show up, and you got to show up with an intention. If you can show up with an intention to better your game, to better your technique, that's even, you're just doubling up on how much better you're going to get. You got to make the most of your time.
100%. I mean, bro, it's like I've said this before. I've said it plenty of times. Taking a small amount of time, like on a regular basis for a long duration, long period, right? It works like magic. Doesn't matter what you want to do, whatever you want to get good at. That's the secret. I mean, there's people that have certain gifts, and certain people have certain dispositions. They have certain things that were whatever, but nobody, not a single person, no matter what story has been told, there's no like out of the box like grandmaster at what they do. They just don't exist. It's not a thing. behind every person, there is a crazy amount of work and effort that was put into it. And if they're a so-called overnight success, you just never saw the work. That's all that was. But that formula, right? A small, like little bit of time done on a consistent basis for a very long period. It works like magic towards whatever you want to be good at. And again, the problem is that nobody wants to get good slow. That's the issue, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have a choice, because I mean, it's like trees, right? Like it's like you wanted that tree planted, you wanted it bearing fruit tomorrow. Well, guess what? It's not going to do that. So plant it now, and in a few years, maybe it could, but it ain't going to happen anytime soon. So just be ready for it.
Yeah, it's some of the stuff, like some of these concepts, whether it's a concept in a specific technique or a concept in general, they're not very like earth-shattering, like these crazy things. It's like, Roger Gracie is so good from close guard. His close guard is incredible, right? Very basic. He's taken this many years that he's trained, and he's used these, like he has like cross collar chokes from guard and stuff, and they're like, and he hits those on people, and you're like, nobody's hit those in years. Like nobody hits on high low. Right. He hits it on, he can hit on anybody.
Well, and what I liked what he said about that is he's like, sometimes people call his game so quote basic. Correct. He's like, but here's what he said. He goes, okay, whatever. He's like, but he goes, I'm using techniques that nobody else uses that you learned on your first day, and I use them at the highest level. So he's like, it's not basic. He's like, it's very difficult what I do. He's like, talking about that. And it's like, kind of like, what's more impressive? Me using a technique you learned on day one and using it on the best black belts, or some guy coming up with some new technique that works for a year, but then everybody figures it out, right? I mean, that's impressive. He can take the most basic things and the most fundamental techniques and use them at a certain level. They're not basic. Yeah, I mean, we mistakenly use that terminology, basic. It's a fundamental technique that you can learn at white belt. But again, if you consistently put that time in for years and years and years, over a long period of time, you get this amazing ability to apply stuff that's so effective. And again, it doesn't matter how like well known it is, you can still do it. So
right. And I think we got a little bit of taste of that when Muhammad Ali came to the seminar, and we did some of those collar chokes and stuff. Remember, we started working collar chokes. And I was like, man, that's the last time we worked these cross collar chokes and stuff. And we did some modifications, like try this, do this setup from this way. And then like, oh, wow. And like, you can see all these light bulb moments going off.
Well, and what was funny about that was, one, I got a concept for my cross collar chokes that changed my cross collar choke game. I was like, okay, so I started hitting more cross collar chokes immediately after. Yeah. And also too, Muhammad went and competed a few weeks later up against a really tough black belt and finished him with a cross collar choke. Yeah. So like, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's very cool, like to see that. And you're right. Like going back to Roger Gracie, it's not basic. It's like, it's a fundamental technique that is
it's advanced basics.
It's performed at such a high level, right? To be able to do a move that's one of the greatest in jiu-jitsu. One of the displays of mastery is being able to do a technique that everyone can do, but do in a way that's not able to be stopped really by most people. Like sometimes, like I'll roll with you, and I've talked about this before. Like I know what you're getting ready to do, and you still do it. And that sometimes, it's like I'm already like dead to rights, but in some ways I see it coming. I can't stop it. And that shows like mastery, especially against someone that's like, that's skilled, that's trained for a while. And Roger, going back to him, does it at the highest level. And you're like, what he's going to do from there. And he still hits all these people. And even Gordon Ryan, watching his, him doing something like as simple as like, I'm going to armbar this person from top, and I'm going to do it. And I put it in an envelope, and I'm going to say I'm going to do it. And then he does his thing. And then knowing it, if you see the result, and then knowing what he was going to do, if you watch that over again, you can see the progression. It's like, oh, here's his path. And he kind of had this idea. And I don't know, it's just interesting to me. Like the levels to jiu-jitsu as well is very, very interesting. And
impressive.
You can get to those high levels in different ways too. That's the cool thing, right? You can get to a very, very high level being a leg lock guy. You can be a very, very high level being, just a basic passing and getting to the back and submitting people from the back. So that's the cool thing, right? Like how people's paths in jiu-jitsu vary and evolve, and like what in their progression as a young white or blue belt or whatever, like sparked that direction for them, right? Yep. And that's interesting. And sometimes it's the gym, and sometimes it's the coach, and sometimes it's a seminar, right? But it's just interesting to me to see like the high level of jiu-jitsu and how the variety of it is.
All right, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed the podcast today. Hopefully you got something from it. As always, the idea is to leave you again. Podcasts typically aren't too long, and the idea with them is to leave you with an idea to chew on. Right? That's the idea behind it. So with that said, hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. And again, thank you for listening as always. Also, thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web. You can check them out at charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu20 for 20% off the order. They make an amazing CBD product. They are one of the premier CBD companies out there. I feel like they're one of the first ones that I ever heard about making CBD way back in the day, and they continue to do so. They continue to make new and innovative products for people, everything from gummies, tinctures, balms, things like that, as well as THC-free style products, which they contain a little bit, but for testing purposes, they're useful for that. Do your research, of course, if you get tested, but they make a product for people who do get tested. And again, if you want to check it out, go to charlottesweb.com. And again, if you find something you like, promo code is Jiu-Jitsu20. Also, thanks to Epic Roll. EpicRollBJJ.com is the website. My buddy Matt over there is a jiu-jitsu black belt who rolls and trains just like we do. And he makes a bunch of cool products, good quality stuff with cool designs. Again, you can go to EpicRollBJJ.com. That's the website. And the promo code is Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off. Also, thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring the podcast. You can check them out at Manscaped.com. Again, they make a ton of really great products for guys, everything from beard trimmers and trimmers for whatever else you want to trim. Perhaps perhaps your nether region. They also make body wash or soaps, colognes, and everything. And I've used all this stuff. I mean, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I used a beard trimmer the other day. I haven't. I don't need to trim right now, but my body hair gets trimmed with their what is it? The lawnmower.
Lawnmower. Yep.
I've got their body wash in my shower, and I use their deodorant this morning. And so again, I'm like all Manscaped up, and Eugene and I are both wearing their.
This was not planned.
Their underwear right here.
The old boxers. They're comfy. I like their underwear actually. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. So again, if you want to check out any of their stuff, go to manscaped.com. Jiu-Jitsu20 is the website. 20% off the order, and you get free shipping. If you want to support the podcast directly and get access to a ad-free version of this podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Also included are bits and pieces of different podcasts that we don't release anywhere else. Sometimes those are technical tips with the black belts that we have on the podcast. Sometimes they're advice from some of the doctors and PTs and things like that we've had on the podcast. And other times it's me and Eugene going deep dive into a particular subject. But again, if you want to get access to it, get it at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. You'll get extra content and it supports the podcast. It's a win-win. Also, if you want to get my daily email, you can do so by going to my website at jiujitsu.net/join, JOIN. Upon joining, you'll get access to 2 exclusive ebooks for free. And then afterwards, you'll get my daily email that I send out that goes into a ton of different stuff, everything from books that I'm reading to philosophical ideas on training and jiu-jitsu to obviously tangible tips and even events and products that I'm coming out with. And everything and all is there. You can unsubscribe at any time. So guys, with that said, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you next week.